It is my pleasure to introduce our chairman, Mr. Nigel Romano, who will serve as the moderator for this opening segment. His full bio is in the agenda that was sent to you this morning. So if anyone does not have the agenda, please indicate to us so it can be placed in the chat for you. And I'm saying this because I want to deviate from the written profile that we have to Nigel, to say that not only is he a chartered accountant and an expert in the balance scorecard and someone who has worked for 15 years for Citibank in senior positions across several Asian countries. You can read all about that in his profile. What I want to say is that Nigel is an exceptional leader and an awesome chairman. Over the last 5 years, he has steered the direction of CCGI through the tumultuous times of COVID-19, when the work of most NGOs like ours diminished. Instead, Nigel joined us to support our weekly online discussions on the impact of the pandemic on businesses, and has retained a very visible and active support over all these years. He has offered steadfast leadership, very open to new ideas, and a willingness to step out of the ordinary to allow us to pursue very big, hairy, audacious goals. And we at CCGI could not have asked for a better chairman. His commitment to be here today and the active support in this effort is just yet another example of why we hold him in such high esteem. Nigel, it is my honor to invite you to take over the virtual podium now to introduce our main speaker, Charlotte Valeur. And I would suggest you allow her to present, and then after her presentation, you introduce our two panelists, Professor Garratt and Carolyn, so that they can share their thoughts before you moderate the Q&A session. So over to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Kamala. It's good to be here with you all this morning. I'm going to ask you to do something for me, Kamala. I'm going to ask you to introduce the speakers, and then we can get going with the conversation. Thank you.
Well, as a matter of fact, let me share on Charlotte Valeur rather than read her profile, which, as I said, a lot of you would see her full details. And in fact, I will ask our staff to please put on the chat the agenda for today, which includes all of the profiles of our speakers today. For Charlotte, I want to share my personal thoughts. Charlotte, is that okay?
That's very fine for me. Thank you, Kamala.
Okay, great. So Amelia, let's bring on Charlotte onto the screen as well. And I was introduced to Charlotte Valeur by Professor Bob Garratt. And that's one of the reasons Professor Garratt is our global ambassador. There's so much we can say about him as well. But just wanting to start that Charlotte was introduced to CCGI by Professor Garratt. And over the last few years that we have known her, she has served as the opening keynote for our Governance Week signature event of CCGI. But more so, she has been such an inspiration to us as someone who really does innovative and groundbreaking work in this area of governance. She has created what is known as the Board Apprentice, a program to train persons to understand what it is to function effectively in a boardroom. She does a lot of groundbreaking work in the area of diversity, particularly, I think, neurodiversity. She has an excellent finance background, you know, and serves as a board member on a lot of companies, serving as chair as well. So I would invite you to read the details of that, but more so to join me in appreciating the fact that she's someone who really has a willingness to, similarly as our chairman, and I think that's one of the beauties of us at CCGI, being able to attract persons who are like-minded. Charlotte is one of those persons who has amazing ideas and who works to implement them, and so has contributed significantly to the work of governance globally. And we are blessed to have her as part of our CCGI community. So Charlotte, this idea of an alliance of small states is from you. And so it is with great honor that I would ask you to present today.
Thank you so much, Kamla. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. It's very appreciated. And thank you so much, all of you, for being here today. It's great and an honor for me to be able to present my thoughts on this, which I really did first time 2 years ago when I reached out to a small handful of people in the governance space around the world that I had come across over the years, and Kamla being one of them. When I worked as the chair of the Institute of Directors UK, there were so many different countries that approached us and me directly to get support their own director institutes in the different countries. And there wasn't really an ability to do that or a focus on doing that, not from any of the bigger organizations that have the resources to do it. And as I came away from the IOD, I couldn't let go of the thought that something is missing here in terms of collaboration and working together. There isn't really that sort of proper collaboration between director institutes around the world in helping each other, and especially the smaller organizations from smaller countries to help each other thrive and grow. It's almost as if we are slightly more competing, and even though there's a global GNDI for director institutes, it feels more like coming together and talking about things, but not really getting to the next stage of actually supporting each other. So I thought there must be a way where we can bring a number of especially smaller countries together. So I'm from Denmark originally, at Cambridge. So I know when you're in a smaller country. I was also in Jersey, Channel Islands for 17 years. It's not that easy to gather enough sort of resources to actually lift significant work to be done to make sure that we do enough training and appropriate training, and also come together and have a stronger voice together. So I felt that in today's very otherwise interconnected world, this importance of sound corporate governance can't really be overstated. Corporate governance forms a backbone of our economic stability, fostering trust among investors. You know, especially the smaller countries can be quite dependent on outside investment, but also larger countries are, and other stakeholders and the broader public. So I feel that if we gather the resources together, and the resources that are required really to do that, as I said, can be taken from larger countries like the US and Australia that has very large direct organizations. But for the smaller states and sort of mid-sized countries with fewer resources, I feel that they face significant challenges in developing and maintaining these kind of standards independently. Collaboration is really the key here. So the vision I'm having is really one of unity and collaboration. Like, I was imagining a global alliance where direct organizations from different countries come together in a true collaboration, pooling their resources, knowledge, and expertise. And this alliance could serve as a powerful platform to address unique needs of the various nations, providing comprehensive support in corporate governance and director development. Through this cooperation, we could create a more equitable and effective system that benefits all, which is what I feel that we need globally to really lift and raise the bar. The primary aim for this global alliance would be to initially to create and deliver high quality content tailored to the needs of directors across various regions. The content can range from a comprehensive director qualification program to specialized corporate governance subjects, and will have input from all countries involved so that we ensure that it works for everyone. We might even find a way where we can all share different content across borders and therefore also, you know, leverage off each other. I felt that by delivering a standardized but yet adaptable curriculum, we could ensure that directors everywhere have access to the knowledge and skills they need to lead effectively. I'm a professor in corporate governance with the University of Strathclyde. I'm looking at putting different corporate governance pieces together that I feel is well needed, and that where there are gaps currently. The director qualification I know already, Kamla, for example, is running one. Different organizations already have one, but I think we need to share some of this so that all countries have to develop that. And there must be a way of sharing so that everybody can benefit from it on a licensing basis or whatever it might be. But we need to just broaden this up a lot more. So I have a number of points that I feel is needed to achieve us coming together. So one is identifying the needs. So that's really the first step in this journey, is to thoroughly understand the specific needs of director organizations in smaller countries. It could also be like a startup help, you know, a direct organization in a box if you want to help countries who haven't yet got some to actually start up. I had some conversation with the UN Global Compact a couple of years ago when I first started looking at this, and they were interested in seeing more what we could do. Some countries had approached them around governance and directors wanting to put something together, but for some countries, the kind of things they wanted to push for was possibly not what their government wanted to push for. On what, you know, country we're looking at, because not all governments are that interested in properly running businesses, and we need to take that into account as well and support directors, but also protect directors in those countries through a global alliance like this, so that they don't stand alone trying to improve business in their country, that we're all behind each other. So we need to look at what are the gaps in corporate governance, director development, what unique challenges do each country face. And we would try to conduct like a detailed needs assessment, if you want, where we can tailor our content and support to address these very specific requirements. So another one is the content development and delivery. I think once there is a clear understanding of the needs, the people who want to be involved, we can then develop high quality training materials. I've served on board myself for over 20 years. I've pretty much been involved with every aspect of business and many different industries. I'm currently on a fusion energy board for the UK government, for example, where we're delivering the first prototype of fusion energy plant that delivers to the grid. Especially small states would benefit from something like that. Again, if there is an alliance already, that could help bringing some of that to individual countries. It's basically the sun on earth. If you Google it, you will see what it's trying to achieve. It's been worked on for 70 years. And finally, there is a breakthrough that makes it possible to deliver it. That could solve energy problems around the world and diminish dependency on the fossil fuels that we are trying to not use. It is still sort of 10, 15 years away from fully delivered, but these things take time to work with, to push for, and to move on. So the content would be designed to be both rigorous, because that's what I'm used to do for university where I'm a professor, and accessible, ensuring it can be effectively delivered in diverse contexts. And I think that's really important. Yes, diversity is quite a big thing for me. I happen to be autistic myself and have ADHD, so that's driving a lot of my energy and my thinking in many ways. Right and wrong is very important to me, and the understanding of neurodiversity is extremely important to me, because I feel that we're missing a piece in terms of make sure we tap all the different talent that's around us, and we come out in equal numbers around the world. So I think all countries, again, can benefit from looking at some of that as well. So we want to look at training the trainers. A crucial aspect of this strategy would be to empower local direct organizations to become self-sufficient. We want to find a way where there is a sharing of the income from whatever content is there, and the direct organizations are not just, taking content outside and people deliver it and walk away. It's they're hard owning it and owning the income in equal measures as well. And I think that's a really key aspect of this strategy that has not been proposed to anyone yet. People are very busy making their own content and then holding on to it, where my thinking is that we should share it in such a way that organizations can build themselves and grow from that, ensure they can hire people to run it for them, because as you know better than any, Kamla, it's pretty difficult to do this on an all voluntary basis, right? We need to have a commercial mind and make sure that we commercialize it for everybody involved, so that we have full-time employees to help us. We will focus on developing trainers within each country, equipping them with the knowledge and skills to deliver our content effectively. So create a sustainable model through this where local organizations can generally continue to educate and support their directors long after the initial training. And then, you know, after behind that, we will bring up new training all the time in various aspects like AI and, you know, data governance, the kind of things that are not easily available in different places. We could this way develop a global bench of trainers, which could be used to go between the different countries and thereby also learn from each other. I mean, this is multi-collaboration I'm talking about. It's not, you know, us coming in and giving, it's everybody working together. So global bench trainers could be maintained at the central level, and these expert trainers could be drawn from around the world, will be available to deliver training as needed and ensure that high quality instruction is always accessible. The bench of trainers could also serve as a valuable resource for sharing best practices and staying updated on the latest development in corporate governance. The fifth point of this is economic sustainability. To ensure the long-term viability of our initiative, we'll organize our efforts so that local direct organizations can generate income by delivering the training in the respective countries. And as I already said, by creating these opportunities, the organizations will grow financially and will not only enhance their capacity to support these directors, but also strengthen their voices in advocating for good governance practices. The final one is global advocacy. When you have many countries and people coming together, we can speak with a unified voice. We can have various, what's it called? Gosh, it went away from my mind. Initiatives where we ask everybody different questions. The word has escaped me, sorry. Where we can go in and look at, for example, the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how we all together push towards that, how we're looking at the Global Compact, 10 principles, and how we all push towards that. And we can influence what they do in the very large international institutions, such as the UN, whom I work with already on neurodiversity, for example, and ensure that we don't stand alone as a small country. All of us stand together and we get our voice together. We find out through surveys, that was a word for, surveys where we all put our voices to play. So I personally feel, and I'm happy to be corrected by anyone, I feel that there's benefits of the global alliance that are manifold. It promotes a higher standard of corporate governance across all the participating countries. And by providing directors with the necessary training and resources, we ensure that they're well equipped to navigate the complexities of modern businesses. This in turn fosters trust and confidence among investors and stakeholders and attracts more investment and promote economic growth. This is at least what's going on in my head with regards to this. Secondly, the alliance could facilitate knowledge sharing and collaboration. This is the whole core of it. Collaboration is one of my core value words and one that I always love seeing many people collaborate. It really does lift the impact of what we all have. By bringing together direct organizations from diverse backgrounds, we create this rich tapestry of experiences and insights. This collaborative environment allows for the exchange of best practices, innovative ideas, and effective strategies, and it benefits all members of the alliance, or whatever we want to call it. So thirdly, the alliance empowers smaller countries especially to have a stronger voice in this global stage. By enhancing their corporate governance framework and their director capabilities, these nations can participate more actively in international discussions and decision-making processes. And that is super important. Being a minority myself, I know what it feels like when you feel small compared to the big majority, and it doesn't feel great, but it feels great when we can come together and become a heavy voice. This inclusivity, in my view, ensures that perspectives and needs of smaller countries will be more taken into account and lead to a more balanced and equitable outcome for all of us. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, this creation of the Global Alliance for Direct Organizations of small countries and mid-sized countries is not just a vision. For me, it's a necessity. In a world where economic disparities can undermine stability and progress, it's imperative that we come together to support each other. By pooling our resources, knowledge, and expertise, we can create a powerful force for positive change. So if we can, or some can commit to this vision of unity and collaboration, would love to work together to elevate corporate governance standards, enhance director capabilities, ensure that every regardless of size, has the tools and support needed to thrive. Together, we can create a brighter future for businesses and societies around the world this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. That was inspiring. So I'm going to introduce Professor Bob Garratt, our CCGI Global Ambassador, and we love Professor Garratt very, very dearly. Of course, he's an international consultant and academic. He specializes in the review and development of boards of directors and works on 5 continents. I don't know how he does it. He's best known for his long-selling book, The Fish Rots from the Head, Developing Effective Directors, and his latest book, Stop the Rot, Reframing Governance for Directors and Politicians, is proving much read, and that during the COVID pandemic. So we'll hear a lot from Professor Garratt, and we of course have Carolyn Chalmers, the CEO of the Good Governance Academy, based in South Africa. Carolyn is the CEO of the Good Governance Academy and the ESG Exchange, both of which Professor Mervyn King is the founding patron. She's also the co-editor of one of my favorite publications, the ISO standard for the governance of organizations, ISO 37000, and the co-convener of the Governance Maturity Technical Committee, ISO 37004. So I'm not going to say much about it. I'm going to ask both Professor Garratt and Carolyn to jump in and provide their comments as we begin discussing this very important topic. Professor Garratt, do you want to open the batting?
No. Thank you very much, Nigel. But I had a whole hour last week talking online about this. So may I ask Carolyn to start, and then I will join in the choruses.
Thank you, Prof. Garratt.
Okay.
I think the importance of small states coming together can't be overemphasized. Just as Charlotte was saying, the sharing of facilities, the collaborative programs, the SDG 17, Sustainable Development Goal 17 says it all, partnerships for the goals. So really we need to forge strong partnerships at a national level to be able to better utilize the limited resources we have and make those resources available to far more than just the limited resources we have available in a single state. So my passion for writing international standards has really shone through in the introduction. So co-editing 37,000, being the lead author of 37,004, and now a new proposal coming through on the governance of group organizations. And we know that in small states, we have lots of multinational corporations that operate and use our countries as a subsidiary, and then that that organization doesn't necessarily get the autonomy that it deserves. So I think that's really important, and my passion for writing these international standards really is on the basis of what Charlotte was saying, is to try and bring these practices, make these practices available that are being practiced through in large countries and making them more explicit and available to small states. And we do that through making the pricing for the standards a lot cheaper and affordable through the national member bodies in the specific countries. And then, of course, the countries themselves can leverage those standards, which brings an equality to international trade for their specific purposes in the country. So that's why I'm focusing on the international standards, but also in the Good Governance Academy is as a public good, again, bringing together global thought leaders to make that knowledge available, accessible through these publicly available webinars, just as Pamela is doing today, and making part of this conference available through a live stream, which it's just promoting that continual accessibility to information of an international standard. And maybe just a last point to Charlotte's, what she started with, is we can't do this without a commercial mindset. The small states don't have a lot of resources. The small states also need to charge and not only work on a free basis, but it's certainly something that we need to focus on, is having a broader base of stakeholders on a smaller scale to be able to collectively participate in terms of building something bigger. So opening remarks from my side. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you very much, Professor Garratt.
Okay, and thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, I absolutely behind Charlotte and what Carolyn just said. It strikes me at a time when globally we're seeing the pulling apart of a lot of international cooperation, and where there's one power block that seems to be building at the moment around China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, which looks frighteningly powerful. Although my experience behind the scenes in two of the biggest ones there is quite the reverse, that I think they are in grave economic trouble and also grave demographic trouble. The decreasing male population in Russia for obvious reasons, but the decreasing female population in China is already creating all sorts of economic and social stresses, which will not allow them to easily project power across the world. And we're seeing the possibly the third civil war now in the US. It's really beginning to take off with this election campaign. And we're seeing the erosion of the notion of the power of the EU. And the whole thing is just fragmenting at the moment. I don't think it's as frightening as we think, unless you're very frightened by actually what we're talking about, the growth of smaller nations and the way in which they can begin to influence much larger global trends. And that's, I think, one of the things we need to be looking at. So, I mean, just thinking, the British Empire is now projected, although it's now seen as in huge decline, projected as this massive force that went over and took over a quarter of the world. I mean, historically, that's a load of nonsense. Originally, it was a very small failing nation which commissioned a bunch of pirates, literally a bunch of pirateers, to go out and start stealing from the Spanish and the French, and then later from the Dutch, and to begin to build up some wealth there. They were rarely able to use force to create their empire, but they used trade. So rather than the current saying that trade follows the flag for the Brits, it's the other way around. For most of its history, the flag came in to support the trade that was being developed, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in absolutely diabolically bad ways. But it was a very small nation getting quite smart over a couple of centuries. And I think worth thinking about, because underneath it, there was exactly what Charlotte and Carolyn were talking about, which is a strong institutional framework backed by law, which was developed right throughout that time, which has almost become, certainly through the Commonwealth, the 54 nations of the Commonwealth, it's almost become a global standard in its own right, the basic corporate governance law and the company law there. So I think we have plenty to build on amongst the small nations. We've got a good institutional framework which we can develop, and I'm rather interested in whether we could, instead of assuming that we must learn from the big powers and things must trickle down, I think we should learn how to trickle up, how to really use our limited but very well informed powers to influence some of the bigger players. The notion of making sure that as an alliance, our rate of learning is equal to or greater than the rate of change that's going on in the environment is absolutely key. And that rate of learning means we have to be nimble and fast in our learning, and we have to be able to capture that learning. And we have the IT to do it now. I mean, I won't rant on about artificial intelligence, which I don't think is very intelligent at all at the moment. And if you look at the share prices of the Magnificent Seven in the newspapers overnight, you know, almost all the major US players are now plummeting share prices, as even the public are beginning to realize that artificial intelligence is not necessarily very bright and is also based on a whole series of piracy activities in the intellectual property world. So they're beginning to get their comeuppance. So rather than their slogan of move fast and break things, I think we should move fast and learn things nimbly. And that's something I think the smaller nations do have the capacity to do. And then to back it up, yes, let us therefore use those notions to look at the way we train our trainers, develop our developers, the idea of increasingly common assessment and accreditation between the smaller nations, I think is well worth exploring, because I think we could actually create a global standard. I won't say easily, but I think convincingly that's there as well. And all of that then reflects on not just our economic sustainability, but particularly at the moment in relation to the Caribbean, our environmental sustainability. Because after the last storms, the last typhoons, sorry, they're not typhoons, wrong part of the world, the last hurricanes. Yes, sorry, it goes back to my Oriental background, but we do have to learn very fast if we are going to live where we're currently based in the world. So I think all of these ideas are coming together quite nicely. And the way in which we organize that learning, the center of learning, and the rapid transmission of learning and the consequences of practicing that learning are very important indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Garratt. I want to bring it back to the kinds of small states that we believe should be the example. And for me, that suggests small states with strong democracies, very well established and very well run institutions. And the word that comes to mind a lot for me is transparency. So going back to ISO 37000, which, as I said, is very near and dear to me, the whole pursuit of purpose. So we talk about in ISO 37000, we talk about organizations, but is it fair to say that we should also be able to apply ISO 37000 to nations and how they are organized and how they are run? The pursuit of purpose, clear values and policies, and very open and honest about what they're trying to achieve and how they're going to go about achieving that. I will throw that out.
Thanks, Nigel. If I can comment on that, yes, certainly. I think we would all be a lot better off if purpose was defined a lot better in a national perspective. And it's certainly something that we're expecting from our political parties when they set policy to be a bit more explicit. And actually, I'd like to hand over to Prof. Garratt again, just to explain in terms of purpose and policy setting at that level, because I know Prof. Garratt has been involved in presenting at a government level. And I think your question is well positioned in terms of transparency of purpose at a national level, in terms of what that nation is intending both domestic as well as international policy. But let me hand over to Prof. Garratt, and then I think perhaps Charlotte. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, at the national level, the expectation of national governance is the primary duty, the primary purpose of national governance is the protection of the citizens of the state. So it's actually very much around the physical and emotional protection of those people. And then from there, obviously, it spins out into the way in which economic and social and now increasingly environmental issues are then coped with at a national level. This can be done in a number of ways. I would challenge Nigel a little bit there, because I don't think it's necessarily democratic, although most of the good examples are from democracies. But that's because for nearly 40 years, I lived on and off in Hong Kong. If there was one fairly successful small nation that really was motoring and was really looking after its people and its environment and its wealth, the development of wealth, then it was Hong Kong, which was not a democracy at all, but it was unusual. It was a plutocracy. It was actually run by a few businessmen under the very benign and very long-armed view of the British government, who for the most part just left it alone because it was doing its own thing and doing it well. Sadly, in the last few years, that's just been crushed. So we now have nearly 300,000 Hong Kongers moved rapidly to London and beginning to help the UK economy more than slightly. But it's not just democracy, although I would say the values of democracy are absolutely fundamental in doing that, even though if the government system is not there. But I would argue that corporate governance can be a very helpful model for national governance in the way in which it tries to ensure that there's a balance between the powers of ownership and the rewards from ownership and the effects on all the other stakeholders in that organization, public, private, or not-for-profit. And it's trying to get that right that I personally believe most of our political parties have completely messed up. And I would argue, for example, in our election here only 2 weeks ago, it is not surprising that only 34% of the total population voted, causing a landslide to one party. And a number of the younger people did not participate. And that, I think, is a sign that the bipolar notion of political parties is now actually fighting against the notion of democracy through the voice of the people being heard and the government protecting the people.
Charlotte, you want to jump in?
Yeah. Thank you. It does make you kind of question it. It has made me question that for some years. Does democracy as we know it work, or does it not work? Certainly, I think some amendments to it would be helpful. I have always sort of looked at politicians as the board members of the government of a country. Look at the country more as a business. Absolutely all the principles that we talk about within corporate governance also is applicable when you run a country, because you've got all the same ingredients. You've got the country as the organization, you've got the stakeholders, the employees, if you want, as the citizens, you've got finances, you've got all the various different things that needs to fall in place. You need assurances, you need to know how to manage public money, because you are accountable to every taxpayer in that country. And they are trying to do that. I have spoken to a number of different governments around governance of their way of doing things. And a number of the governments, certainly the ones that came to me, I guess they came to me because they were willing to look at better processes, better procedures of managing the money that belongs to all of us, because we are all contributing into that, managing the finances and the resources of the country, national resources, anything, you know, we want to develop, and how to ensure that we do that in such a way that all citizens are treated equally and have equal access to services and can function as equal citizens. So a lot of the work I do around human rights and equality obviously feeds into that, because really it's about ensuring that the people you are there to protect, as Bob said, I mean, if it's there to protect every citizen, then we have to make sure that that happens equally. And as people, we can only influence by lobbying in the background, which has always been my preference. I wouldn't like to be a politician. I think it must be hell. And I have a lot of respect for the people who do give their time for that, because it affects their entire private life and life possibly forever, and family. So we shouldn't underestimate the job that these people take. What we should do is try to help and support them as much as we can in driving things in the right direction with the right underpinning of values and rights and wrong. And I think we can do that. And this is one reason I love governance, is that it's a very good way to help also governments do just that, if we come together enough people. So again, in neurodiversity, I launched the Institute of Neurodiversity 2.5 years ago. We're over 20,000 people now within it as members and supporters, and literally we're all volunteers. There was a real need, but we now have a voice, not just in one country. We have a voice in 10 to 24 different countries where we're setting up now. When we say we speak on behalf of over 20,000 people, even if there's only 1,000 in that country, they can still bring in all of us. So this is a very clear example of, if we all come together as nations, how we would also get that weight. And it's surprising how quickly you get that weight of voice when you come together, many people. That is really, for me, the ultimate way of influencing is many people together, not one leader, not, you know, one face, all of us lifting and raising ourselves to speak up with one voice. That's really ultimately the greatest power anyone can have, and a power that many countries are very scared of, because they know the power of it, which is why when you have movements that are led by just one person, you often see assassinations of that one person. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, you know, it goes on, because the thinking is that if we do that, then it would all wither out, because those people brought too many people with them. So therefore, an alliance has to be a true collaboration of all of us raising our heads together. And that is the only way this kind of thing will work, in my view. But absolutely, Nigel, great question. We can absolutely push into the government's governance as well as the corporate governance. Yeah.
Thank you. So one of my concerns is, and both you and Professor Garratt said it, we must protect the people, we must serve the people. But I am thinking win-win. We can serve the people who are prepared, or let me change it a little bit. How do we inspire, how do we get people engaged in the work that needs to be done? Because you have situations now where with the advent of AI, and I agree with you, AI is not necessarily intelligent. It's being trained by us to do work that we need done. And within the confines of that training, it can function. However, it is still taking jobs from a lot of people. And that prospect, we can only expect that to increase as the technology becomes more powerful. So in a situation like that, how do we protect those? Not everybody can do certain jobs, despite involving everybody. There will be leaders and there will be leadership. and some people will fall behind. So how do we deal with that? How do we address that situation? Because it's a very real situation. And the alternative is for those who are disadvantaged to rise up. And as Professor Garratt said, maybe there's another civil war or something like that. How do we get involved in that conversation? How do we make that shift?
And may I
complete
to Nigel's question, because I think it really strikes fundamentally at what we are trying to achieve, because it is not just a matter of us coming together with an alliance, but really what is the purpose and how do we achieve that? And I think Professor Garratt has given us our true purpose. I love what he said. And so I'm going to be repeating it all day today. He says that we have to create an alliance that allows us for our rate of learning to be greater than the rate of change, right? That's key. Now, Nigel has asked a critical question. How do we get people engaged to ensure that we achieve that particular purpose? And I think Charlotte spoke to it in her opening presentation when she mentioned not just the development programs, but ensuring that there is a way of assessing. And so it comes right back to the basics. What gets measured gets done. So we are going to have to bring together two very critical elements. One is that we need to be able to conduct surveys, as Charlotte said, so that we could measure that impact, right? So that has to be part of our design process. But critical to all of this, I think, is what Professor Garratt has guided us to, which is developing that voice of persons who can become that strong lobby, but it must be that we are focused on learning quickly, and learning at a speed that allows our alliance to be strong and effective. Because if we look at it in the context of how government has functioned, so we accept what the role of the government itself is, but let us also understand that there's been strong lobbying voices that has influenced government. And the reality is we have not had the lobbying voices that we are now talking about. Lobbying for the greater good, lobbying for equality of access and resources. Instead, it's been strong economic voices lobbying for their particular purpose. And so for me, I think a fundamental part of what we need to do to achieve what Nigel is asking, how do we engage people, includes these conversations. Finding the right voices, the people who share this common value of building an alliance that is willing to learn quickly, to grow smart, and put in the extra hours and effort so that we can have that voice to help achieve our purpose. And in that, designing a measuring system so we can assess where we are at and where we are going.
Absolutely. If I can add to that, one of the big issues in South Africa is arguably one of the best corporate governance codes in the world, alongside the UK. And why do we still have corporate governance failures? Well, although we've got reporting as a requirement in our listed entities, no one is monitoring those reports. You'll be lucky if it looks different from year to year. There is no assessment instrument, and that was a key reason behind the ISO 37004, was a mechanism to measure. And it's not indicators, it's more of a measure of a propensity to get better, a continual improvement measure to say there is no right today, because today is not going to be the same as tomorrow. So we need to measure with a mindset that says, how can we do better tomorrow? And to Prof. Garratt's point, it has to be better then there has to be more effort than just maintaining the status quo through a changing environment. And if I can talk to that as well, is that, and this is an age-old problem, is that we're so busy doing the business of governing the business that we're not doing the business of governance. We're not, and I equate it to, we're using a washing machine to wash our clothes, but we don't clean the washing machine. We use dishwasher to clean our dishes, but we don't clean the dishwasher. So we're using dirty things to try and make things clean. And we need to practice our ability to govern to be able to govern better. But that comes, to your point, Kamala, it requires over and above effort to better learn how to do the business of governing rather than just governing the business. And it does require additional effort. And learning does require effort. And we need to make that learning accessible, available, and exciting. It needs to be consumable because everybody's busy, and specifically in the resource-poor states, in the small states, is that we're so busy competing, trying to do better with fewer resources, with resources that are not what's given to the rest of the world, with resources that we have to be comfortable with, and we're having to do more to compete. So it's even more challenging for the smaller states, and that's why we do need to work together. But Charlotte's from Jersey, so although it's a slightly different environment, maybe just some indications there from what your experience is there, Charlotte.
In terms of governance or in terms of
small state? Yes, governance, because you've got lots of organizations based there.
And Charlotte, just as you pull your thoughts together, I wanted to just say, so it's 10 a.m. now, which gives us the half hour into this opening segment. And we do have persons who have joined us from around the world. We have Edwin Ward, who is in with us. We have Mpofo, who is here from Botswana as well. So you can join in this part of the conversation as well. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Just I'll try to make this brief as well to make space for other people. So Jersey, again, a small state, 100,000 people on an island in the middle of the channel. In the book Campbell referred to, they talk about managed intimacy, which I found interesting. I thought about it and I realized from my perspective, that is holding countries back as opposed to pushing them forward. So that might go a bit against what the book says. But for me, managed intimacy is the same as what people do in organizations, in social circles, even in families. You will say or not say certain things so that you can fit in and you're not getting kicked out of the social network. And in smaller states, this is especially a problem where you are connecting with everybody at all different levels, privately, at work. Everybody knows each other. I mean, in Jersey, everyone knows each other. I was quite well known, and in the end, it sort of turned out to, because I speak my mind, and that was not really acceptable within the intimacy. So I got kind of isolated in that context, and people apparently called me trouble. So whatever trouble it is I am representing is still a myth to me, but it is uncomfortable when someone says the truth. And I spoke up about, racism, inequalities, lots of things that nobody wanted to hear, like nobody wanted to hear. But someone has to speak up, or these kind of things will never change. How do we get people engaged with this work that needs to be done, Nigel? Great question again. And from my perspective, I thought a lot about that, because it's easy to start things and then do all the work yourself, which is actually not that easy. But that's what often people end up with. That's not it. That's not what we're looking for here, right? That's why I think it's only through equal sharing of resources and income. We've got to make sure that the countries have income and the organizations can grow themselves on this work. In every country, that will lead to job creation. So that's a very direct impact, that there will be jobs created for the trainers we train, and we can, also move on to training them to do board reviews, blah, 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 all these kind of things, so that it cascades out to all the different countries. Flexible learning, we have to have like a central group of some kind with people from all the different countries that will think about new things that we need to learn. And from my perspective, AI is great in taking some sort of repetitive, relatively dull things away from us so we can use our brilliant human brains to think out of the box and think about different ways of organizing ourselves. And it actually gives us an amazing opportunity to grow to grow cognitive maturity more rapidly than what we've seen. So we stopped burning people on the fire 200 years ago. We cognitively grew to understand this is kind of not really very human. And then we did other things. We're still doing lots of things that are not human, but we are cognitively growing all the time. But we can grow a lot more, as Mandela showed us what he did through his time. And he came out at a very high cognitive maturity level. AI helps us to be able to focus in on that. And the training should also be some of this understanding of what does it mean thinking about the world holistically as opposed to the world within your ego? You know, what does it do for me as opposed to what can I do for the world? And I think that's a really important aspect of AI coming in, helping to do that, as long as we use AI in the right way. It is just a machine. Unfortunately, it can put in biases that we can never remove again, or we have to work pretty hard to remove. But if we feed it a lot of the right things, it seems to start changing. Certainly, I'm using it around neurodiversity, and it's talking back to me different now than it did 2 years ago when I started feeding it with different words around, you know, autism, ADHD, Tourette's, what have we. So I think it's great questions to discuss, and we should discuss it. And I love the analogy to use dirty things to make other things clean. Let's use new things. Let's get new stuff to the table. Let's try to come together as smaller countries and race above what has been done, the same thing for the last 30 years in other places. Let's be the ones that think differently and actually come out with new levels of operating at.
Let me read a statement question posed by Charlene Sharp, who is one of our board members. He says, can we argue that the values of democracy are critical but cannot be implemented successfully in small states in the process of development? He said, it seems richer states can manage democracy, but once economic challenges become great, or where there are fundamental divides in a nation, whether on issues of race, gender, etc., then democracy breaks down. Is democracy as we practice it a problem for corporate governance? Do we need a basic level of economic attainment and a basic level of social cohesion for democracy to work? Maybe if we fix the quality of the democracy, then we will fix governance. Now I'm reminded of Lee Kuan Yew, and I'll go back to the Small States Club. And he inherited the potential for division between the Malay, the Chinese, and the Indians in Singapore. And he deliberately went about pushing them together literally in communities to prevent them from, you know, kind of building up communities where there could be opportunity for tension. And he also prevented the Muslims from wearing the hijab and that kind of stuff. I mean, apparently simple things, but in that situation, here was a democracy that was very, very much ordered and managed to ensure that those kinds of divisions didn't happen. So the question of, and going back to Professor Garratt and Hong Kong, and I've lived in both Hong Kong and Singapore, and to see the energy of those places. But as Professor Garratt says, there were democracies in inverted commas. So what would be your comments there? Do we need a benevolent dictatorship to make governance work? Right, because democracy is messy. Let's be very clear about it. Democracy is a very messy prospect. I think it works and in the long run, but in the short term it can be. But I would like to hear your thoughts.
Could I make one quick comment on that? Just one line. For
me, yes, please.
All decisions governments make should make social, environmental, and economical be that sustainable, both socially, environmentally, and economically. If it ticks all those three boxes, then I don't care where on the political spectrum it comes from. But if the decisions they make follow those three in a balanced way, then we can't go wrong. It never does, but if it did, actually, then we can call it whatever we want. But you know there'll be a good balance.
And can I add one thing to yours, Charlotte? It must be long-term thinking over the 4-year period that you're in government. Got to be beyond your tenure. That's the only thing I'd add.
And I would add that part of the problem with a lot of organizations, and I'm talking about businesses now, is that short-term thinking as well. Yeah. So they're looking at the current financial year or the next 2 financial years and not the long term. And going back to Professor Garratt's point, when he mentioned both the USS, Russia is no longer the USSR, Russia and China, and the falling male and female population, those are long-term consequences of bad short-term thinking. And anytime we lose the appreciation for purpose, anytime we lose taking the time to involve people in the conversation about where we want to go and how we're going to get there, we end up with those kinds of situations.
If I can just add to that, so in making a decision, nothing lasts forever.
No.
Unless it evolves, and even then it hasn't lasted. But considering the cost of exit, so in entering a war, what is the cost of exiting that war? Political cost, social cost, environmental cost, not only the cost of doing it, but also the cost of exiting it. So now we're starting to hear about wind turbines, batteries, the cost of actually exiting it. But as long as we can address the cost of exiting it, understanding that we need to evolve and continually adapt, and we don't enter into something where the cost to exit is literally just kicking the can down the road to the next generation. So bring that cost up front. And it's just a lesson that I learned in the IT world, is that when I first started programming, it was back in the days with IBM mainframes, and our programs had to be tested to last for 400 years. And why 400 years? Because of the leap year story, and some years we won't get leap years and all of those kinds of things. So that's why it had to last for 400 years. If you have an IT system that lasts for more than 5 years without a change, then you're dead in the water already. You're in trouble. So when you create anything today, you have to create it understanding what it's going to take to exit it, or to adapt it, or pivot it, or change it to changing conditions. So I absolutely agree, Nigel, is that we have to think about, it's not the quarterly returns, it's actually what are the long-term implications of this, and the cost of being able to change through that period, the longer term. Sorry, I think I interrupted Prof. Garratt. He was going to say something.
Go ahead, Professor.
A couple of things. I like the idea of, one of the things I think we can demonstrate, and we need to find, say, for the Alliance to have any credibility, at least one project for each continent where we can begin to demonstrate what it is we're talking about. And that's going to take a little time to work through, but it needs to be something which is likely to have a highly impactful and credible result. That's part of the learning thing. I dug around when we were talking about the purpose of state, etc. And I mentioned defense, that was the primary one. Ed Straw published about 10 years ago a very helpful book whose name I cannot immediately remember to my embarrassment. But what I do know is he had 3 elements, but he was very careful here to differentiate between the nation and the government, and to say that the government needs to deliver a whole series of things, but 3 in particular. But these must be balanced by the enterprise of the private sector and the not-for-profit sector, and if necessary, some of the state-owned enterprises, but as enterprises, not as governmental institutions. And the 3 things he was saying the government needs to provide are very basic. They are the government as service provider, whether directly or indirectly, as an employer of labor. So the government as service provider, the government as service purchaser, which then links back into the enterprise economy. The notion of the government in those public and private sectors contracting suppliers in their various forms, and then the government as regulator to ensure both through the courts and through the development of their own social, environmental, economic regulation, that equity is seen to be happening in various ways. And I think that notion of supplier, purchaser, and regulator is quite helpful if you are trying to decide where we are going to help and where we're going to find some projects to actually demonstrate the way in which we can, through raising our heads together, create this quality of corporate governance as a demonstration of what larger governance could be.
Thank you, Carolyn, for putting the book in the chat, The Hidden Power of Systems Thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Governance in a Climate Emergency by Straw. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Now,
Any
do we have no one in the
well, yeah,
I was wondering
going to ask you this question.
Yeah, exactly.
Any comments, any feedback from the audience?
And if persons don't mind, because I know that they're there, I would like to invite Dr. Wada with us in our room. So Dr. Wada, we'd be happy to have some thoughts from you as well. Because you actually come from that region where, you know, a lot of what we're discussing in terms of what type of political system and how do we get that long-term thinking, because both Qatar and the United Arab Emirates were among the countries that Mr. Sarkisian spoke to.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I have a lot of things going on in my mind right now. I don't even know where to start with regards to the conversation. Of course, Botswana being a small state, the key word also that I picked was, you know, does a state need to be bigger to be able to, you know, do democracy quite well? I have mixed opinions with it, because in the midst of it, when the discussions were going on, I was seeing the Botswana at a young age when Botswana was just starting after independence, and you know, the traditional way of doing things is sit around and talk and discuss and pave a way forward for everybody else, and that traditional note helped us to build what we have today, to say people need to sit around, talk things out, and plan a way forward. But fast forward, yes, the democracy is growing. So then the growth also comes with complexity. As we know, things become complex, people become complex, and indeed it is becoming messy, because obviously everybody also has their own opinion. And also, just maybe borrowing from what Charlotte was saying earlier, being a small state, small amount of people, everybody knows everyone. And so you really there's also that thing of not speaking out, being afraid to speak out, for fear of, being looked at, the other way as well, which is pretty much what we are trying to demystify in boardrooms. I mean, that's the culture that ends up actually building the governance style, I would say, of boards, because people are saying, no, we don't want to talk out or speak out for fear of, being looked at the other way. The other thing also that you talked about was with regards to what is it that can be done? To help these small states to really push forward in terms of obviously development, in terms of obviously putting corporate governance in place, and even governance at national or government level as well. So I'll give an example in terms of what is happening right now in Botswana is that there is a lot of training that is going on within different entities, organizations, be it state-owned, be it private companies, be it public companies, and so on. And with state-owned entities, what I came across of recent, which is quite interesting, is the board is saying, you are talking to us about governance at this level. We need somebody to engage governance at government level, because as state-owned entities, we are really the decision maker is government, isn't it? Government is the main shareholder. When we talk about control, government is the main shareholder in terms of state-owned entities. Though they are meant to serve the nation or the people, somebody over and above the board, which is the ministries and government departments, are the ones which really bring down the policy and also sometimes make some decisions for those organizations. So the challenge then now is look up. We've been doing it from bottom up. Now we've got to now step up and go up really, because we are at a level of boards. So the challenge for us, even in terms of establishing a rapport, establishing a good rhythm of governance, is to go up now to those that are in charge of national governance. So that's my
thanks, Info,
contribution at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, Edwin, is your audio working now?
Good afternoon. It's been a fascinating exchange, and from Charlotte's keynote all the way through to the last comments, there's plenty to think about. I too have had a few exchanges with different people about what is a small state. I'm living currently in a microcosm of our microstate on an island called Gozo, and there's about 30,000 people live on this island. It's much smaller. It's about 1/20th of the population of the main island. So for those of you in the Caribbean, you'll recognize that every small island feels that it has some form of political identity. It has some form of economic identity. And, I started looking around for a vehicle to try and, sort of gather my own thoughts to exchange with others about what is a small state. And I'm a great believer in not reinventing the wheel. The United Nations has something called, very euphemistically, the Forum of Small States. And these small states range in population from about 10,000 to 10 million. So quite a broad range. And there's 105 member countries there, which potentially I imagine once we agree philosophically on our key promise to governments, to private sector entities, to non-governmental entities, not-for-profits, and so on. When we have this package agreed amongst us, there is a pool there of 105 countries waiting, probably quite eagerly, to improve their governance, because the one thing that they all have in common, as we all have in common, is that we need jobs and growth. And we need this more urgently now than we ever did at any time before.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, when we have statements being made that corporate governance is the backbone of the economy, I think that's something that Charlotte more or less kicked off with. To get that message through to 105 members of FOSS, I think we've got, you know, a target market there. Apart from our own needs, because I think each of us in our own right have needs which we're looking to address in our national context. But what I'm talking about is how we work as a collaborative group internationally to take our message about better governance being better economic prospects, better business, more ethical business, a better way of doing business among states. You know, there's a lot of mistrust in international trade at the moment for a variety of different reasons. And this could be one part of a jigsaw in helping to establish a form of Caroline was talking to the ISO 37000 and 37004. We also heard about the SDG 17. But, you know, we actually need the contact between the groups. The documentation in its own right, as valuable as it may be, is no substitute for people coming together and being able to share their experiences in business in an intimate forum, a workshop, a seminar, a conference. You know, this is something which is absolutely tangible, and where a network can be built around the pillars that we are talking about today, the drivers which will bring the small states together and improve director capabilities and skills and ethics.
Very good, Edwin. Thank you. Dr. Wada, if you would like to share some thoughts as well, just as we come towards the close. Is Dr. Wada screen frozen? I think because I'm not seeing his movement. Okay.
Yeah, it looks like he's frozen.
All right. So Edwin,
well,
that too. Sorry.
Yeah, Dr. Wada and
Info, yeah, will be.
Info is going to be on at 11. So we're at 10:30 right now. And I wanted to thank Charlotte, Professor Garratt. I think we lost Carolyn.
Yes.
But for an excellent kickoff session. And I hope they're going to stay with us for the rest of the day as we get into ESG sustainability and the climate agenda and the impact on small states at 11 Eastern Time, and later on technology, AI, and blockchain. So thank you all again very much. I think there is a lot to unpack, and I want to thank Edwin for his reference to the Forum of Small States. I think it was started by Singapore a long time ago. But again, target markets, the small island development states as well. Really good input into what we're trying to achieve as we push this agenda forward to improve governance in small states, both at the organization and the national level. So thank you all very much. I don't know if you want to say some closing remarks, Charlotte.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing this to the table, Kamla. This discussion, I think, is an important one that we should continue to have, and we will be looking for people who want to work with us on developing this, and then, you know, potentially start with 5 different countries, maybe grow it 100% every year to 10, 20, and then have a sort of a goal with what it is we need to do, and then sort of an annual get together where everybody puts their thoughts to the table, so that we can truly create something that helps everybody, and that is definitely a win-win. Thank you so much for everybody who partook in this and who give us some thoughts, and hopefully we will move it on from here. Thank you, Kamla, again.
Thank you.